Welcome back to another episode of the Bourbon Lens. This is your host, Jake. Scott's not able to join us today, but we're very excited to have the Kentucky Distillers Association join us because they know a lot of things about a lot of things when it comes to bourbon. So sit back and buckle in to the latest episode of the Bourbon Lens. Eric, like I said in our pre-show little conversation, it is great to finally actually have a conversation with you. Seen you a dozen, if not more times, walking around, cutting ribbons, shaking hands, kissing babies, all the fun things at distillery openings. So it's nice to kind of meet the man leading a lot of the charge in Kentucky bourbon.
Well, appreciate it. Thank you. It's an honor to be on. Yeah, things are a little busy right now, but I like the fact where you're going, that yes, we're still having ribbon cuttings and grand openings seen here in Kentucky. The news of our death has been greatly exaggerated.
Yeah, I mean, you flip open an article every day. Is the boom over? Is bourbon dead? That's where we could start, but I don't want to because this is, National Bourbon Heritage Month is kicking off as we let this podcast go. And I think that's the most important thing. The native spirit of America, born and bred in Kentucky. We're going to celebrate all of that month long in September. So what's that like for you all? You're working bourbon all year round, but that month of celebration, what's that like for the KDA?
September's my favorite month of the year anyway. You're getting out of the heat of summer, you're getting into a little bit of the cool of the fall, and the leaves start turning in Kentucky. Football season starts and you got horse racing season coming up. It's that typical really good time to start drinking, rediscovering your bourbons. So yeah, Bourbon Heritage Month is kind of like, the best time to be alive in Kentucky, because it seems like every night there's a different event. This year, the way the calendar aligned, we're kicking it off with the Kentucky Bourbon Festival. So you go straight from Labor Day right into the festival. And I can't think of a better way to kick off Bourbon Heritage Month here than the Kentucky Bourbon Festival.
It is. And they're year 34. Next year's a big milestone for them in year 35. It's kind of nice as a Louisvillian, a local Kentuckian, having Bourbon and Beyond and Bourbon Festival separate. So you're not trying to run back and forth to Bardstown. You're not missing anything this year, which I think is great. I think it just kind of happenstance.
Yeah.
Because they pull from two different crowds. One's, 100,000 people, one's 7,000 people, but a lot of the loyal bourbon people love good music too. So, you miss out a little bit, but excited to see these split up. And always give a shout out to Kentucky Bourbon Festival, because Randy and the team have done a phenomenal
They do a fantastic job
making Bardstown the center of the bourbon epicenter, especially in the first week of September, is amazing.
Well, and they've really reinvented that festival. I mean, it used to be a much bigger festival. They had a ton of events and things like that, but they kind of refocused, focused more on a lot of the experiential things to do. We also would change some laws here in Kentucky that, allowed them to do things like sell bottles on the line and sample on the line that we couldn't even do before that. I mean, you had to go through all sorts of crazy ABC licenses and stuff. Mm-hmm. And now, it's kind of your bourbon lover's dream, to be in Bardstown, those days, because it's a really immersive experience.
For sure. And I think that's one of the things we've forgotten about is like House Bill 500. I think I got that correct. Like changed a lot of the way Kentucky distilleries could do a lot of things and how you could transact bourbon. So in your role, you're not only supporting these distilleries, you're also helping, for quote unquote lobby to make sure that we're taken care of from a consumerism standpoint, that they're from a production standpoint. So what's that like to kind of work the legal system and the actual like Senate and floor, and like, you're grinding on that too.
It's kind of been the backbone of the KDA, but we were founded in 1880, by a group of distillers who were sick and tired of paying taxes. 45 years later, we're still sick and tired of paying taxes, but we've done a better job managing that. But yeah, so that's really the backbone of everything we do here at the association, is to work with our elected officials and opinion leaders and others to make sure they understand the impact of what bourbon means to Kentucky and what's standing in our way from reaching even higher goals and opportunities. So you think 10 years ago, you could not go to a distillery in Kentucky and buy a cocktail. You could go to a winery and get a glass of wine. You could go to a brewery and order a pint. All you could do in Kentucky was go maybe buy a couple of bottles, get a very, very small sample, and then you're off to the next one. Our consumers, our visitors were telling us, we want to do more while we're here in Kentucky. So we're very fortunate and gracious to our partners in the General Assembly, who we have just gone, year in and year out with, trying to roll back a lot of those Prohibition era policies, to make the Kentucky Bourbon Trail adventure, on par someday with like Napa Valley, where you can come here and not only sample and do it, but now you can stay in Louisville, go to these fantastic bourbon themed restaurants. We've got vintage spirits here in Kentucky now, so you can sample from a literal bourbon library full of different age bourbons. And the distilleries can now go to fairs and festivals and farmers markets and things and sell cocktails and do tasting classes. And it really has opened up a lot of opportunities, like you said, not only for the distillers, but mostly for the consumers and the visitors.
For sure. And I think David Mandel said it best when he was president of the Kentucky Bourbon Festival. It's sips to lips, right? If I can experience that and I can try it, the likelihood that I might go support, especially those craft distillers that you may never heard of, and you buy a bottle from Hatfield County or whatever, that you don't even know that that's a county, even if you're a Kentuckian. And now you own a bottle of bourbon because you enjoyed that sip and that story and that conversation.
Yeah, no, I mean, when we created the Kentucky Bourbon Trail back in 1999, it was mainly meant as a way, everybody knew Maker's Mark. And
Hmm.
back then, think of it, Woodford was only 3 years old. So, you're coming to Kentucky to visit Jim Beam or Maker's Mark or Wild Turkey. They're really well-known brands, but you probably don't know about Four Roses yet, right? You may even have not known about, some of the other smaller brands that we had during that time, like Diageo had Bullet out. And it was still, I mean, back in 1999, that was still just an up and coming brand. So the goal was to really kind of get everybody to, come to Kentucky, experience everything here and learn more about all these brands and then go home and we call it pollinate, tell all your friends and families, you're never going to believe what I got a chance to do in Kentucky, and things like that. And to think that now, I mean, that was 6 distilleries. I think now we have 60 distilleries that are on the Kentucky Bourbon Trail Tour and in 20 plus counties
Yeah.
in Kentucky.
Well, east to western Kentucky too. I mean, you're not just stuck in central Kentucky. You really, you move. And it's so funny when we think about central Kentucky, right? Central Kentucky is really all the distilleries that like you think of heritage brands are right there in central Kentucky. And then you go everything out to western Kentucky spirits, all the way to dueling grounds out in Pikeville, right?
Purple
There's
Toad.
just yeah,
Now, I mean, I got to get a shout out. I'm from Western Kentucky. I got to give
yeah,
a shout out to my Western Kentucky gang because there's a lot of great distilleries, that are west of us,
100%.
and you mentioned, our friends at Kentucky Whiskey House. You've got Brent Gooden and Boundary Oak there, just down the street. You've got Peg, Casey Jones and Hoptown, MB Rowland
Yeah.
and Christian County. And I tell you what, I saw today on Paul Tomaszewski's newsletter, you've got some distilleries opening tasting rooms in Cave City. You're just a stone's throw from Bowling Green there. So capturing all that traffic going to Bowling Green and then down to Nashville and then coming back up to Louisville, those are going to be great experiences. And I think they're going to introduce a lot of new visitors and a lot of new people to Kentucky bourbon.
Yeah, and you still have people like Horse Soldier that's looking to invest in Somerset in that area. You've got Jackson Purchase that just moved up into the heritage brand, right? From the distillation
Making great
perspective.
whiskey. Yeah, I'd like to see
Yeah,
them open a visitor center, but I keep on pressing them.
yeah.
Maybe this year with Craig Beam getting in the Hall of Fame, they'll decide to do something like that.
And they just got a lot of press, right? Going up to that heritage, and they're going to put out their own whiskey, right? I think, which is really cool. And so, it's so interesting to see brands evolve over time, and grow. I think one of the perfect examples is New Riff, like what they were at the very beginning to what they're producing now, and like creative partnerships with graders right across the river and things like that. So, I mean, for you, it's got to be a great time to see these brands evolve and grow as bourbon has exceeded expectations, in a variety of different ways. But, that leads us to the next point, right? What news channel do you listen to, right? And what failing story of bourbon have you heard today? Because it's very doom and gloom, and people have been saying that bourbon's dead, there's no growth, brands are going to die, and what do you say to that, right? Being in the heart of this, where 90+% of the bourbon is made, I don't see it being dead. I just see it restoring to normal.
Yeah, I mean, look, we're a resilient industry, right? We survived prohibition and came back stronger. We survived the 70s and 80s, when bourbon took a nosedive and came back stronger. And even back then, we did not have the global markets opening up, like we do today. So, yeah, are we drinking less today than we were a few years ago during COVID? Thank God, yes, because I don't think any of us could have kept up with the COVID consumption levels that we were. And we're just like any other industry, right? We're susceptible to all sorts of supply chain pressures and changing consumer tastes and things like that, just like anybody else is. So, Yeah, we've definitely got some headwinds right now. And I think the thing that makes a good headline, and I used to be a reporter back in another life, but what makes a good headline is all these things converging at once, right? And suddenly you see sales have slowed, a little bit. You've got the tariffs that are impacting a lot of what's going on here in Kentucky. You've got some new distilleries that just came open that, may or may not survive or may get purchased by another distillery. That happens in business all the time, so I'm very bullish on Kentucky bourbon. We still produce 95% of the world's bourbon, or like we like to say 100% of the world's bourbon worth drinking, but I will tell you, yeah, I'm worried about a lot of these distillers, especially the craft distillers in other states that maybe don't have the 200 years of history and heritage, that we have here. And look, me, I'm biased against Kentucky, but there is some great whiskey being made in some of these distilleries in other states. There really is. I don't want to put anybody down because there's some great juice out there. But we've got the cooperages here, we've got Vendome here, we've got the built-in tourism here and things like that. And all those things kind of help us, manage some of these speed bumps a little better. But look, we'll get through it, right? The distilleries will adapt and evolve. They'll figure out what they need to do next and they'll get through it.
Yeah, and I think that's my big thing is, you know, there's still more barrels aging here than there are people, right? So there's a
Three
lot of
times
liquid.
as many barrels as there are people.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, you think about that, there's a lot of opportunity to do a lot of different things. Right now we've seen the bourbon enthusiasts go for ultra, ultra premium, but now you see Heaven Hill and Jim Beam putting out 7-year age stated
Hmm.
whiskey, or Wild Turkey 8-year age stated whiskey. And we've talked about that a lot recently. They can put that as affordable pricing. It's full flavor. It's 100 proof most of the time in those bottled and bond type of experience. So you get what a lot of people, Jimmy Russell, what your all's KDA house is named after, his quintessential bourbon is 8-year-old 101 Wild Turkey. So, you're getting a lot of type of quintessential bourbons, and you're getting to feel what Kentucky was like probably a lot back pre-prohibition, when you were drinking 7, 8-year-old whiskey was probably
Yeah.
about the standard what you were getting.
Yeah. No, you're right. I mean, innovation is the key to everything, right? I mean, we don't want to become a complacent, just, stagnate and say we're Kentucky, beating our chest, we put out the best bourbon and that's it. No, you think about, again, 25 years or so ago, 30 years ago, we weren't even really getting on the small batch and single barrel bandwagon as much. I mean, a lot of those brands that you just mentioned have just been developed in the last generation, or less. But innovation is definitely going to drive the future for this. RTDs are a big growing element right now. So you've got, several companies getting involved with that. And look, the craft distillers are doing their part on this as well, because right now, yes, there is whiskey on the market for them to buy. And so you got a lot of craft distillers that are buying some of these barrels that some of the bigger distillers may have available. You're either bottling it or blending it, with some of your own stuff, coming up with a lot of different varietals and things like that, and putting on selling your gift shop as a gift shop exclusive and driving traffic right to your home place to learn about what makes you different, right? A lot of the craft distillers are taking advantage of that right now. And again, it's innovation. They're doing what
I
it takes
mean,
to survive.
for sure. And I mean, we were just talking to 15 Stars last night, and Rick and Ricky have done that. RD1 just did that with their
Hmm.
launch and their commemorative bottle that they were able to get. There's a lot of great liquid available, and it may not hit, your traditional Beam, wherever, whoever it might, Barton, whatever, but it's coming out in other ways. The other thing is, consumers are like, oh, well, that's an expensive bloody, bloody, bloody. Well, hey, like you said, taxes still an issue.
Yeah.
You gotta pay the man when it comes to those things. But you mentioned probably the one big thing that a lot of people have thought about is bourbon and tariffs, right? Because sometimes we do get grain, especially that malted barley from Germany, for instance. So a huge part of bourbon creation is in that germinated malted grain, malted barley, to ensure that there's the enzymes, unless you want to use like Pat Heist, enzymes to make things happen, and yeast, but there's that from the making the product, but also it's
Yeah.
shipping
Selling
out.
it.
Bourbon has become big worldwide, and it's only getting bigger. But how does this tariff machine slow these things down?
Yeah. Well, that's, our greatest strength traditionally has been we are America's only native spirit, right? You can only make whiskey in the United States and call it bourbon. You can't make anywhere else. Just like you can't make scotch anywhere else but Scotland, right? Or Canadian whiskey anywhere else but Canada. These are indigenous products, distinctive products of their countries, and they're protected by all sorts of treaties and alliances and things like that. So, now we're easy pickings when there's a tariff fight going on, dealing with cars or steel and aluminum or something else. The other countries look immediately and say, well, what do they make that nobody else can make? And we'll just take advantage of that and hit them where it hurts. So back in 2018, an international reporter called me like 4 o'clock in the morning and said, hey, what do you think about being pawns in a trade war? And I hadn't seen the headlines. I'm like, what are you talking about? And they said, yeah, the steel and aluminum tariffs have gotten caught up, and now they're putting a 25% tariff on all bourbon. And part of me was like, we've made it. We're on the global stage. We're
Yeah.
being used as pawns in a trade war. And then about 30 seconds later, oh crap, we're being used as pawns in a trade war. And so we have been doing everything since 2018 to sound the alarms and make sure people understand that you are not going to find a greater success story, American success story over the last generation than Kentucky bourbon. You
Hmm.
want to talk about, again, America's only native spirit. We have, completely invented ourselves through the small batch and the single barrel brands. The cocktail culture is back, right? The Mad Men effect with all the great classic cocktails, which are bourbon cocktails. And then the free trade agreements back in the 90s with NAFTA and the EU trade agreement opened the doors and finally put us on a level playing field with Scotch. And they've been distributing that whiskey since like what, 1400, 1600. They got several centuries head start on us. So you started to see us, start to send more whiskey overseas. And when people got it and tasted it, they loved it. How
Hmm.
can we make more of this? So a lot of that growth from about 2007 through 2017, 18 was all geared for the international market, where you've got a lot of distilleries that went from being heavy domestic sales to, maybe now it's a little more 50-50. We send a lot of, whiskey across the pond. And I got to give it up for our friends at Brown Forman. Jack Daniels. Jack Daniels is an 800-pound gorilla when it comes to American whiskey. And luckily, they had the distribution networks overseas, and Kentucky bourbon could follow them right in. And we did. A long way to get around is saying is, yeah, we're definitely part of the global economy. So, when these tariffs and even the threat or the uncertainty of these tariffs, when these things start to crop up, then yeah, we start to get a little anxious because you can't make Kentucky bourbon overnight, right? And we're a little bit of a crystal ball industry anyway, with the experts trying to forecast out what a market's going to be like in 6, 7, 8, 10 years. And you're trying to figure out
Yeah.
how much bourbon to lay down. Well, now you're looking, is that market even going to be available to us? You know,
Hmm.
so, you've definitely seen some production being scaled back a little bit to try to right size inventories, because and you and I have talked about this. Our biggest concern would be, Canada is a great example about that. Not only are they tariffing us 25%, they took all our products off the shelves. That's our largest export country, close to 100 million a year in spirits exports. If that whiskey doesn't go there, where does it go? And it's not like we can open the door and start selling to India overnight, even though we did get our tariffs lowered on that. So if that whiskey stays on the domestic market, then you do start to see more of a glut. And that's going to have effects on a lot of distillers, and especially, unfortunately, I think a lot of the craft distillers who just don't have the inventory and the capital that a big Brown Forman or Jim Beam has to write it out.
Yeah, and I think, it's a catch-22, right? Because the consumer wins in that,
Yeah,
right? Because then you'll start to see bottles that would be, $400 or $500, maybe 200 or 150, right? Because they're like, we need to move product and we can afford to price it this way. And I've heard off the record about how people price bourbon. A lot of it, the pricing of bourbon changed when secondary blew up, right? As
sure.
illegal as it is. It changed the way brands looked at it. Well, hey, if my bottle is going to go for $300-400 on secondary, why can't I eat first on that?
Yeah, it's supply and
And
demand, right?
it is.
Yeah, it's supply and demand.
And so we've seen a lot of changes in the way it is, because I'm not walking into Rite Aid anymore and buying my first bottle of bourbon for $25, which was Weller 12. I'm just not doing that.
You're not.
Would I love that? Yes, I would. But, this isn't 2010, right? 15 years ago, it was a whole different ballgame. And now we're in a world where bourbon is it feels like king, right? Depends on what you read, but bourbon is king in my mind, right? Because it is the thing that we talk about so much here. It's a $9 billion industry. It buoys a lot of the state from a reputation perspective. We've got three things that people know Kentucky for: horses, bourbon and basketball,
Yeah,
right? Like
and
that's what
chicken,
people and chicken.
and chicken.
Yeah. But no,
But they're
they're
in
leaving.
Texas now. Yeah,
They're going. They exited stage right, left, I guess, because west is Texas. But anywho, they do know us for chicken, but it's KFC around the world, not Kentucky Fried Chicken. So they
that's
don't. I
true.
don't know.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Neither
No,
here nor there. We're
you're
not going to
right. I mean,
argue about what choices they made. But to get on that number, right? Like I'm not 100% sure how long you've been in your role, but what's it like to see this industry go from maybe $1 billion to $9 billion? Because that is exponential growth in a short period of time.
yeah. Well, I started January 1st of 2008.
Okay,
We
so
had
you've been right here with the boom.
Yeah, I mean, so we had 7 member distilleries, and we were an afterthought here in Kentucky. I mean, I remember going up, our headquarters just a few blocks in the capital here, and I remember going up there, and if we were lucky enough to get a meeting with a legislator, they would say, "You're not a signature industry. Coal is a signature industry in Kentucky. Horses are signature industry. You're an image industry, but you don't have the footprint that you have." And we realized right then that we had not done a good job of telling our story over the last 50 plus years, right? And so we had to change the conversation. And we always use the line from sin to signature. Bourbon is not just a drink in Kentucky. Yes, it's a $9 billion economic engine and a tourism engine, but it provides over 23,000 jobs. 2.2 billion in salaries and wages, $350 million in taxes, state and local taxes, 2 billion in federal taxes, 2.7 million visitors a year to the Kentucky Bourbon Trail Tour. So we started really kind of changing the conversation to let legislators know, hey, we are a signature industry and here's what we contribute. We don't want that to go away. And now we're starting to see an uptick. Help us open these doors and level these playing fields so we can really, push the envelope on these things. And they did. And so yeah, it has been a wild ride when you look back, gosh, 18 years now. And the other thing I think that I really, people may take for granted, but I really look at this and smile. The master distillers that spent so long, the Jimmy Russells, Jim Rutledge, Chris Morris, Booker No, Fred No, Parker Bean, all these people that struggled for years to tell their story and get their brands out, they were in the spotlight finally. And they were being hailed for the whiskey that they've been making for decades. To me, that was one thing that always warmed my heart to see them get the recognition finally after years of being on the bourbon roller coaster.
Yeah, I mean it's true, and like whether they're becoming kind of icons, right? Not just from a bourbon perspective, but worldwide icons. Because when you come to understand what bourbon is about, these people are held in high regard. You go to Japan, like they know their master distillers and they know their that culture and heritage. And I think that culture and heritage is permeating throughout the U.S. If I was going to tell you one thing I would want lobbied for, I'd want better shipping ability as a consumer with bourbon.
Join the club, brother.
That's neither here nor there, but that's my
No,
my
no,
one
no.
thing.
You're right. We've been working on that, So, and gosh, think about this. It's only 5 years since we passed the DTC law in Kentucky, but we knew
That's
that
crazy.
that was the next big thing, right? And if there was going to be one domino that needed to fall first, it had to be Kentucky. And so we got out in front of it again, luckily and thankfully from the support of our General Assembly, and they said, oh, you can only ship to 7 states. Yeah, 7 now. But we don't want to be coming here and say, oh my gosh, this is opening up. You got to hurry up and help us pass this, in 5 years. We want to get it out there so we can do it now. So other states are starting to slowly kind of take advantage of that. New York has opened up to the craft distillers, and we've been trying to help them, work on that. But in today's society where you can go on Amazon and have something at your door in 24 hours, I think it'll be just like wine. It just took wine 50 years to get to 47 states. I think it'll be quicker for us. And something else, I went out and testified in California about this because they were worried about big bourbon, coming in. And I kind of laughed and I said, well, I'm from Kentucky, I guess, speaking on behalf of big bourbon. Who out there is going to spend twice as much to order a bottle of Red Wax Makers and wait 2 weeks to get it, when they can go down to the local liquor store and get a bottle of the makers? This is going to be specialty bottles. This is going to be the clubs. It's going to be stuff you can't see. And that's exactly what's happening. And you've got the makers, the whiskey drop, and you've got, some of these connoisseur clubs that Heaven Hill and BBC and others, New Riff got the Rangers, have opened up. That's what it's going to be about for direct consumer shipping, is getting some of the cool stuff here in Kentucky out to masses in other states where you can enjoy it. So hopefully then again, you'll get it and then come back here and experience
Yeah.
more.
Well, and worldwide, Amazon tends to be one of the largest whiskey delivery systems. I see that in the UK a lot. Like, hey, I ordered my bottle on Amazon. I'm like, what?
Yeah, right.
One day, Jeff Bezos, you will have the ability to ship American whiskey, but not today.
We'll get there. And I mean, it's, look, we've been doing it limited, now for the last 5 years. And I think we've proven a couple of things. First of all, the 3-tier system did not collapse, right? I mean, that's always been the big concern of how the impact it'll have on our wholesale partners. And we see this as a way to augment that relationship with our wholesalers. In fact, I would love it if we could change the law here in Kentucky where your wholesalers, your fulfillment center. They've already got your product. Why can't they go ahead and just ship it out, for you? And the second thing, about DTC is, can it be done responsibly? We have a great relationship with the state ABC. We talk to them a lot. And I can tell you, I'm not sure they've gotten any complaints about having Kentucky bourbon shipped to, somebody who's under 21 or something like that. There's all sorts of constraints put in place for responsibility measures that we volunteered for. And we said,
Hmm.
no, you're right. We don't want this to do. It's got to be done safely and responsibly. And so far, knock on wood, everything seems to be, going along for that. So
Well, I mean, again, sips to lips, right? That's what we want. We want people to be able to try quality bourbon, pick a distillery. The really at this point in my career, are there ones that I lean to probably more often? Yes, but they're all, my favorite when I'm drinking it
well,
because
I see.
I'm
Do you usually
enjoying it.
get the Old Forester emails, the 117
Yeah.
series they have? Man, as soon as that
Yep.
thing comes in, I'm pounding my keyboard to log on. And as soon as I get down there, like 20 seconds later,
Sold
sold
out.
out.
Yeah. People love it, man. They want it, and they want it now more than ever. And so that's why I'm not on the bus train. It may not be booming like it was, but it's still a growth engine that people are enjoying. And you know, we're gonna ride this wave. It's the next thing that we have to figure out from an economy perspective. And um
And that's
yeah, I'm
driving a lot
excited.
of it. Obviously, there's a lot of competition for your income right now, and people are concerned about the economy and what's ahead. And so they're probably focusing a little more on, on needs, not wants, and I've been to a few conferences this summer and with some of other trade associations. And, they're like, your biggest competitor isn't wine, it's Netflix. I mean, right now I've got 3 Gen Zs at home. Well, they're all into college, but I've got 3 Gen Zs, and I can tell you they don't socialize like my Gen X generation, you know,
Mm-mm.
and they have completely different drinking habits. They like to try a lot of different things. They want that experience as well, so, which is why I think we're seeing a lot of trending younger visitors to Kentucky. But they may go out for dinner, everything else, and then they may go home and watch Netflix or, something on Apple TV or something. They don't bar hop or, clubbing like, like us old farts used to do.
Well, I mean,
So,
and that
that's
was
kind of changing. Now we hear that they're coming back, and they're starting to discover more. I really think it's because they're broke. Trust me, my 3 kids, they'd love to be
they're
drinking some really
broke,
good
and half
whiskey.
of Gen Z can't even drink yet. So that's the other issue. We're looking at a generation that only like one third of them can actually legally drink. And we're like, oh, Gen Zs are ruining alcohol. Well, Gen Z goes all the way to fifth grade right now. They're not drinking.
Let's talk in 15 years, 16 years.
Exactly. Let's see what happens as this normalizes. Us millennials are still kind of, we're
Y'all are
we're in
plugging
there.
along.
We're doing what we're supposed to do. We've talked enough about the doom and gloom thing, but there is one other thing that you all brought last year to the market, which I thought was really cool, was a worldwide toast, and we all got to celebrate, and we toasted bourbon via the internet last year for people to really understand the heritage of Kentucky bourbon. And are you all bringing that back again this year as
Yeah,
well?
yeah. Actually, this is kind of breaking news. Well, first of all, we learned a lot that first year, and we learned that 24 hours is probably too much to be drinking around the clock. So this year, I think we're going to focus and concentrate more on about a 12-hour window. But we're doing it in conjunction with Bourbon and Beyond this year. So it's going to be on Sunday, September the 14th. And we still got the hours we're still trying to finalize. But our partners at Lewis Communications down in Nashville that helps us with a lot of our social media marketing and website stuff, they've got some great things that they're looking to do. I don't think I can spill the secrets just yet, but I can say that on that Sunday night from the main stage at Bourbon and Beyond as part of the Worldwide Bourbon Toast, we're going to be having the world's largest bourbon toast. 100,000 people, whatever, at Bourbon and Beyond, all toasting bourbon at the same time. Yeah, I can't wait for that. So
Yeah,
that'll be very
and
cool. If I can get Jim Gaffigan up there, and maybe some of the other artists to do it, that's going to be a bucket list experience.
well, Jim's just going to want you to promote his bourbon, though.
That's probably true.
Yeah, he's gonna be like, "How can we get 100,000 shots of Father Time out there?" Um,
But it's
hey,
gonna be a lot of
good
fun. You're
marketing.
gonna have a lot of we're gonna have a lot of content from our member distilleries with some of the rock stars. They're doing toasts and talking about what makes their whiskeys great, what makes their whiskeys different. And like I said, I'm hoping we can pull a few artists from the stage or get them right before they go on to to raise a glass with us.
Well, and I think that's the thing is music and whiskey and lifestyle are all starting to cross-pollinate. You pick a brand, it might not be a Kentucky brand, but there's a lot of people that are paying attention to the whiskey industry, the American whiskey industry as a whole, and bourbon industry as a whole. And I think that's really cool because rising tides raise all ships, right? And I think we are riding that wave. So I really appreciate the time today for you championing Kentucky bourbon always, and excited to see what happens over the next
Yeah.
several weeks and in the month of September. So really appreciate it, Eric, for joining us
Yeah,
today.
well, we got Hall of Fame coming up too. We didn't talk about that.
Well, yeah,
Man,
big
again,
class this year too.
one of my favorite the times in this year's class is spectacular with, Craig Beam. You've got Mary Dowling, who
Yeah.
a lot of people, the women know about what Mary Dowling did for the bourbon industry. A lot of us men didn't, but Kabe Zamanyan's done a new book on it and kind of resurrecting that brand. Larry Ebersole, the godfather of rye, who's helped start so many craft distilleries
Hmm.
around the country. Former state senator Damon Thayer, who was responsible for a lot of this legislation that we got passed and has his own brand, Kentucky senator. And then last but not least, Lifetime Achievement Award, the Parker Beam Lifetime Achievement Award going to Chris Morris, the
Yeah.
venerable
I mean,
distiller at Brown Forman who has chaired the KDA, I think 3 times now. I mean, he was so deserving for that. Look
no,
forward to it.
none more deserving than he. Chris is the salt of the earth. The last time I saw him, he was actually serving little pours of whiskey. He just will do whatever.
He's not going to
And
stop, man.
no, he's great. And he truly represents one of the most heritage brands in Brown Forman to the utter T. And I think he represents Louisville very
He
well.
does.
Just what Louisville was to bourbon at the very beginning, and obviously it migrated to Bardstown. I think has been really cool. And yeah, I'm
He's one of
really
our longest
really happy.
serving board members. He
Yeah.
and Andrea Wilson, another Hall of Famer from Michter's. They're probably our 2 longest serving. And I can tell you, I've been very fortunate when I started my career here in this business that Andrea and Chris were right with me from the very start and taught me so much. And Chris still calls me usually daily just to check in. Is there anything you need? Stuff like that. Like you said, that's just
Yeah.
kind of guy he is.
Yep.
And he's a
Well,
historian too. He's really
he is.
and he's dedicated to that. And so we lean on him a lot for that aspect of Kentucky bourbon too.
Yeah, and that's the thing. There's more history as we continue to uncover what happened back in 1800. None of us were alive when this was all kind of coming together, and then up into Prohibition. So as we piecemeal it all together, it's great to have people and tell the story,
Yeah,
and that's what it is. It's
exactly.
the story of Kentucky and
And that new
Kentucky bourbon.
generation coming up underneath them, like Elizabeth McCall at Brown Forman, who's been tutored, by Chris. Man, they're innovating. They're trying different things, and the future's so bright for them. Freddie No,
Yeah,
at Beam, you got Colin.
Bruce Russell.
Yeah, I mean,
After
yeah, you've got this whole new crop of, I call them kids just because they're younger than me, but you've got this whole new crop, this next generation of master distillers and bourbon tasters and aficionados and everything coming up that the sky's the limit, right? I mean, yes, are we experiencing some headwinds right now that we didn't expect? Sure. Some of these are out of our control. The tariff things, we're doing everything possible to spread the word that, the 0 to 0 reciprocal trade that we've had over the last 25 years is great for Kentucky bourbon. It's also good for Scotch and other whiskeys, but hey, we're all one big whiskey family.
for sure.
All these different things, kind of going on. So yeah, when I say I'm still bullish on Kentucky bourbon, I mean it. Yeah, we've got some headwinds, we've got some challenges. We'll get over it. We'll make it through.
Well, I think people need to listen to this because I don't think it's as doom and gloom as people want to make it
It's
seem.
not.
So Eric, really
Yeah,
appreciate it.
man.
Thank you for spending some time, and we look forward to celebrating and raising a glass during Bourbon Heritage
All
Month.
right. Cheers to
So,
everybody.
thanks everybody for listening.
Cheers.
Cheers.
See you.